Zoom, absolutely.
I'll take one just in case.
Oh, huh.
Now, there might be stuff in the books I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Not have remind me the office.
I'm good. I'm okay.
Yes.
Are you with Judge Branch?
Yes. I don't know if you guys need anything.
Thank you. So I think they're ready to go when we are.
Yep.
I think you can start whenever.
Well, I'll give you the reason come up. Okay. But I didn't know if we were live and I wanted to know what. Yeah, we're live now. Oh goodness, so everybody hears all of this? Oh, okay. Well, then I should say good evening. Good evening, everyone. I know we're small in number, but I think we can do a little bit better than that. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Kimberly Esmond Adams, and I have the awesome privilege of serving as a judge on the Superior Court in Fulton County, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. I also have the high honor of serving as chair of the Judicial Council of the National Bar Association. The Judicial Council is the largest organization of African American lawyers and judges in the United States. We boast more than 6,000 members, and the Judicial Council has been in existence now for 52 years. We are delighted to be with you this evening as we kick off our annual meeting hosted here in Minneapolis with the assistance of some very fine judges from this area. And one of them is actually on the panel, Judge Harris, J. Paul Harris. And tonight we're excited about the opportunity to share with you a panel presentation that we've created to try to impress upon citizens and communities around the country the importance of serving on juries. Whether it's a civil jury, where people are perhaps having disputes about monetary damages or medical malpractice claims or contract disputes or even land. Or in criminal cases, which I think we know about more, where folks are being challenged with the prospect of losing their freedom. And certainly that's not something that is unfamiliar to the residents of Minneapolis, because not long ago, you all made national headlines with one of the largest cases in terms of publicity in recent years. And so we want members of our community to understand just how important it is for our voices to be represented among juries. And so over the next few minutes, I anticipate that you're going to hear from these distinguished panelists who will be introduced to you in just a moment. But before we go any farther, I'd like to recognize some of my colleagues who came from downtown to be with us this evening in support of this community outreach program. So I would ask the members of the Judicial Council of the National Bar Association to please stand. And you all can give them a hand. Thank you, judges. And so, Pastor, we wanted you to know that we are grateful that you've allowed us an opportunity to be in this space. Your pastor was with us this morning for the beginning of our annual meeting. He shared with us during our opening convocation and rededication and our memorial service. And so you're family to us now. One of our judges is the sister of one of the pastors here at the church, which is why we're here. And so we are delighted that you didn't think it robbery to give us the space and allow us this opportunity to share. The last thing that I want to say to you is, for those people who are certainly here this evening and who'll be watching via live stream, don't ever underestimate the power of the voice that you have. Unless we are sitting in deliberative rooms across this country, there are perspectives that folks will never hear. And when we complain about verdicts, unjust verdicts, or the fact that there are cases that perhaps are not indicted, which happen not to be the case in Minneapolis, but it happens all the time in cities around the country, if you don't participate, you don't have a right to complain. In the same way that if you don't vote, isn't that right, Mr. Representative? You don't have the right to complain. And so we encourage you to take seriously your responsibility of serving on a jury. We hope that you'll spread the message. And I hope that by the end of tonight, you will have a different appreciation for just how important it is as it relates to jury duty to step up and sit down. Enjoy tonight's program.
Thank you so much, Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, Chair of the Judicial Council of the National Bar Association. Good evening, everyone. My name is Claudia Daniels DePeister. I will be the moderator for this evening. I am a judge in New York. I sit in Supreme Court criminal term, where I handle felony matters. But before we get started, I think we need to hear from the shepherd of this house, Dr. B. Chavez Russell, Senior Pastor of the Greater Friendship Missionary Baptist Church, so he can bring.
All right, good evening, everybody. And everybody that's joining online and will join, that's live right now, will join. We certainly appreciate the Judicial Council of the National Bar Association for thinking well of Greater Friendship to have this opportunity at Reverend Collier. We thank you for making the connection. And your youngest sister, the baby, she said, I'm the baby. Judge Crawford. Collier Williams, yes, Judge Collier Williams, we thank you for thinking of us to make that connection, to be here tonight. I just want to welcome you to Greater Friendship, to the great panelists. I know I'm looking forward to learning some things tonight about jury duty, never been called, but I have heard stories, but you know, I'm looking forward to hearing from what the real truth is. So about serving and the honor of serving in jury duty. And what we need to do as a community to do our part. So welcome to Greater Friendship, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Russell. For everyone in the audience and also those live streaming, give yourself a hand. If you're at home, pat yourself on the back for being here, because it's so important to serve and do jury service. When someone reach out to you, serves a subpoena, you need to answer that subpoena. So we're going to learn a lot about that this evening. What I'd like to do at this time is just thank the family here at Greater Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. I want to thank the tech team who put together the slides to help us go forward with the program. I wanted to send a special thank you to Ms. Tanya Hebert-Dixon, who helped facilitate a lot of the things that we were doing out of state before we came here. So we just give her some praise. And we want to also send thank yous to the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers for helping to co-sponsor this event this evening. What I'd like to do at this time is introduce the panelists for this evening's program. They will each be given 1 minute. 1 minute after introductions to tell about themselves and what they do in the law. First of all, I'd like to introduce Judge J. Paul Harris, Ramsey County, Minnesota. Next, we have A.L. Brown, Esquire. He's a criminal defense and employment attorney. He'll tell us about his practice. Next, we have Senator Bobby Joe Champion, Minnesota State Senate and President and Public Defender. And next we have Somay Yanni Esquire, Assistant County Attorney from Ramsey County, Minnesota. So we'll begin with Judge Harris. You could tell us a little bit about what you do.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Judge Paul Harris. I am a judge here in Ramsey County, St. Paul. I am the presiding judge of the Juvenile Family Division. Before that, I presided mostly over criminal matters. Before that, I was a legal aid attorney for a number of years, practicing in civil rights, and then a housing court referee. I'm going to yield my time because I know Bobby Joe Champion is 2 people from me, so I'm going to give him an additional 30 seconds so we can get into the discussion.
I'm A.L. Brown. I'm an attorney here in the Twin Cities. I practice in both criminal and civil law. So, as both a private defense attorney and as a contract public defender in Dakota County. Like I said, I also do quite a bit of civil employment and health privacy. That's enough about me. I'm going to turn it over to Minnesota's first Black president of the Senate, Bobby Joe Champion.
Thank you so much. I am Bobby Joe Champion. I preside over the Minnesota Senate. I'm also a lawyer. I'm in private practice, but I'm a contract attorney in Ramsey County, where I only do juvenile cases as a public defender, because it's always important to me to continue to maintain contact with young people as well as families. On the private side, I do criminal defense both on the state and federal level, as well as entertainment law. So I was in-house with Terry Lewis and Jimmy Jam and all the other sort of music people, and still do that right now today. I still do some business law and some family law, but I don't like family law that much, but I still do it from time to time. So I always get nervous being in the company of judges. So I'm looking at all the judges over here, then I got to look at the judge over there that I did have to appear in front of earlier today. So let me just say thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you do, and I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Good evening. I'm Soma Yarni. I'm a prosecutor at the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. I've been there for about 6 years. Before that, I was a public defender in Minneapolis for about 9 years, and then I was a federal defender in Fargo, North Dakota for 2 years, and I was the only Black female attorney in the state during that time. Right now, as a prosecutor, I specialize in criminal sexual conduct and domestic violence cases. I'm part of a grant that is trying to focus on bringing justice or access to justice for victims of color.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yarni. So just past it. They're having trouble hearing us? Okay, so we'll turn up the volume a little. Okay, we'll take the mics off of the stand, and then as we go forward, hopefully you can hear us a little better online. Let us know in the chat so that they can let us know if they're hearing any better. Just to give you a little overview of how we're going to do this, we're going to show some slides, have a little discussion from the panelists. If you have questions, live stream or in person, you can put some of your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them after we go over some of the slides and have the panelists engage with us with the slides. Okay, so at this time, we'll begin with the slides. Step up and sit down. And you heard already from Judge Esmond Adams that if you don't sit down, if you don't serve, if you don't answer that subpoena, you really don't have a voice in what happens in our community. Be realistic. We have people of color who come before the courts, and if you don't have jury members who reflect the community that they come from, some of the situations that they're describing or the fact pattern of the cases, if the jury has no understanding of that, how are you going to get justice? So those are some of the concerns we have. It's not enough to just say somebody else can do it. They're not paying me enough money. You need to serve, because a person who's charged with a crime or a person who has a monetary interest in civil court wants to know that a jury of their peers is sitting there listening to their story, and that gives them confidence in the justice system. So my first question, and actually, can we go to slide number 1? I'll just read it. Why is jury service important? To have a fair, unbiased, and impartial people determine the fate of fellow residents in their community. So you want a jury panel that represents the people in the community, to make sure enough people show up to provide defendants their right to a speedy trial. We have to pick from a jury panel. We want to get a fair and impartial panel to ensure that parties are given true and just verdicts. Serving as a juror is a duty and an honor. Our government provides a constitutional right to justice. Without juries, our system of justice would not work. You gain greater knowledge and trust of the legal system and greater trust in your community. Next slide, please. Who gets called to serve? Judge Harris, can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So individuals 18 or older are individuals who are called to serve on juries. We have two types of juries that we have. There's civil juries and criminal juries. The criminal juries are typically 12 jurors. Civil jurors are 6. We have a number of rules that talk about what disqualifies you from being a juror. And I would note that oftentimes individuals in our community think that because you may have had some past dealings with the criminal justice system, or there's some things going on that if you're called, you may not get on a jury. That's not true. I think if you get a summons, I would say show up. Take that opportunity to be there and be in the seat, and quite frankly, make one of those attorneys make the decision to try to remove you, either for cause or through a preemptive strike. In addition, I would let folks know some of the things that we disqualify individuals for. When I say disqualify, they don't serve on a jury. For example, I'll tell a story. I got my first jury summons in February of this year. Unfortunately, because I'm a judge, I can't serve, and I was trying to figure out the best way I can try to get on jury, but didn't work out for me. Sometimes the job you have, particularly if you have a relationship to the judge or the system, I think there are language access issues. If you, at this point, do not speak English, I believe that is a reason for you to be struck. But ultimately, you're going to get a notice. You can and should report, and for folks who have busy lives, you have the opportunity to defer that. So I would say when you get a notice, don't ignore it. Call, and if you can't do it this time, you know, defer it and do it later, because it's important to have black faces in the jury box.
Thank you so much, Judge Harris. Next slide, please. So there are exemptions or deferrals. People over age 70, in some states it may be 72, may request an age exemption, but that doesn't mean you have to. If you are still of your right mind and can understand what's going on, you can still serve, but you can have an exemption. As Judge Harris said, some people with language disabilities, if they're not able to understand the judge's instructions and what's going on, then they too will be exempt. I'd like to jump to slide number 6. Does it really matter if you report for jury duty? Representation matters. Senator, can you address that question, please?
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to that issue. So yes, it matters if you show up or not, because once you get an order or a summons, you are required to show up. I know that there are a number of different people sometimes that says, okay, I'm gonna show up, or I'm gonna call and ask if I can be deferred or not show up at all, right? For sometimes if it will create a hardship, you know, some folks will say, hey, I can't serve. There's some listed exemptions or exceptions that would allow a person not to serve. But one of the things that I believe to be very important, I heard Judge Harris talk about it, which is it is so important for us as people of color, and black folks in particular, to show up and be counted. And I know that sometimes when you think about the amount of the per diem, that's one of the things that I'm taking into consideration even as a legislator, is that I think in the state of Minnesota, like $20 or some low number, and then you get some money for like mileage or something. Especially when we are essential workers, we are always the ones who are making the lowest wages. I think it's so important for us to think about it. If we believe democracy to be very important, then we need to change that number and find ways in order to be more inclusive so people who look like us will show up and be counted and participate. But the larger question from my vantage point, I hear this a lot even as an attorney if my client is facing a jury. The first question they ask me, will there be any jurors that look like me? Will there be any jurors that look like me? And especially when you think in terms of the state of Minnesota, where we do look at voter registration and whether you are voting or not as a way to become a part of the pool, that's another reason why it's important to be registered and to vote, because we have to make sure that your name can be one that is pulled from that random selection so that you can become a juror. So I believe that it matters. I think that we have to be very serious about, talking to our legislators about increasing the per diem. And last but certainly not least, I think we also have to see the importance of it, that we know that someone's freedom, especially if you're thinking about it from a criminal perspective, someone's freedom is at stake. And if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. I think it's so important for you to have other people around the table who are able to articulate a thought or viewpoint that reflects your thoughts and your viewpoint. As a lawyer, I often have wondered, what do those jurors talk about when they're in those jury rooms? I've contemplated putting a little TV camera in there from time to time, because I want to know what goes on in there. Because guess what? If you use 12 Angry Men as an example, you remember that movie, the 12 Angry Men, and you try to figure out what goes on and how people deliberate? Sometimes jurors make decisions based on their worldview, and if our worldview is not at the table, then we always get the short end of the stick. And so I would just encourage us to go, and even though you might be able to use an exemption, think about the greater good. But we as policymakers also should be very thoughtful around, if we believe democracy is important and justice is really important, that we need to remove every barrier that we can in order to make sure that people who look like us in this room are not just at the table, so that we're at the table and not on the menu. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Champion. Mr. Brown, we hear of the importance of a jury in a criminal case to reflect the community, but why is it important to have a jury reflective of the community in a civil case?
Well, because one of the assumptions that's kind of built into this discussion is that there's a shared experience or shared point of view. When you look at someone who looks like you, when you walk through the mall and you see another brother, and you ain't seen your brother in the mall, you pass another, I'm thinking about the mall of America. You pass 1,000 people, you ain't seen another black person, you kind of give them a nod, right? There's a sense of comfort that you might get a fair shot. Just because you're my color don't mean you're my kind, but you might get a fair shot. When you look at a jury pool that's all white, they may not understand your perspective. And so when you tell a black person, yeah, she made sure, a black person on the jury says, yeah, she made sure that I got up to my room because she thought I was breaking in, so she had to escort me up the elevator. They know what that feels like. Whereas a white person or somebody who doesn't have the same experience, white, black, or indifferent, might think that person was being super safe and not discriminatory. So in the context of a civil case, whether you're talking about employment discrimination, whether you're talking about a privacy type case, I handled quite a few of those. I handled a case where the family dynamics were such that this young black woman didn't want her parents to know her medical business. And it was difficult persuading a white judge, why wouldn't she tell her? It's none of your business why she wouldn't tell her. But I would like to think that folks of color would appreciate the dynamics that work out in our families, sometimes differently than they expect. So both in civil and criminal, the underlying kind of premise is, if you look like me, maybe you understand what it is to be treated like me, and then maybe I'll get a fair shot at this outcome. It's not a guarantee, but it's a shot. And I think that's what most people want, is a fair shot. I've had the same experience as Bobby Joe. You sit down at trial, the defendant looks over and says, "Look, the level of discomfort when that all-white jury walks in is something that is terrifying to a defendant. And you have to literally counsel them. Listen, you're in 12 of them, just about guarantee you. And the level of confidence in the system goes down just by that fact alone. And it may force a person to take a plea, it may force a person to take a settlement that they would not have taken, because the fear that someone doesn't understand your experiences, make it more simple, the fear that you won't be heard. That's what we're really talking about on a human level, is will somebody hear me when I say I've been done wrong? And sometimes seeing someone who looks like you gives you that confidence. Even if it's a fake confidence, it's better than none at all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. Ms. Yanni, if potential jurors have to work and would lose money each day they sit on a jury making, how much you said, $20 if they have to sit on a jury for days or even weeks, why isn't that a good enough reason to excuse them from serving?
Well, I think frequently it is. Hardship is something that's talked about in every jury trial. So there's people who, they've got families, they've got jobs that, there's some jobs that'll pay you while you're on jury service, but there's a lot that don't. And so for some people, being on a jury for more than a couple days will really impact their income for the entire month. So when people express that it's gonna be a real challenge and it's gonna cause hardship, frequently that'll be a reason for them to be let go. But most judges try to see if there's, any kind of flexibility that would help that person to remain on the jury, because it happens pretty frequently when you'll have a really good potential juror that's a hardworking community member and they just can't do it because of the financial strain. And that's a person who potentially would have been an excellent juror.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yanni. Judge Harris, what are some of the most unusual reasons that you've heard from persons trying to get off jury duty that didn't work?
You're at a church.
Oh, man. I don't think people get creative anymore. I think they just tell you, I don't want to be here. And I think that's the one that tends to happen most, and we try to probe and try to see why. What I will say to folks is this. When folks get there, and they're actually in that room, there's usually a very small percentage of people who try to get off the jury. I think folks, and particularly in the Black community, folks do have a sense of duty and a sense of wanting to be part of it. And I think a lot of the times it is real hardship. And we try to figure out a way to get around it, but life is what it is, and you deal with it. I think what I've found particularly is when folks get there and they see that defendant sitting there and they hear the charges and they start to ask the questions, I think just like that defendant's looking and saying, what's going on, jurors also see it. I mean, if you're sitting on that jury box and you're looking around and you're saying, I'm one of two Black folks, or I'm one of one Black person, and the defendant is there, you do have a duty. So that's what I always say, is that's why we just need to get folks into jury service. I'll just share this in that here in Minnesota, we did a study in terms of where are we lacking in terms of people of color in jury service. And it's getting folks into the jury room, just responding to the notice. Because when they respond to the notice, people of color, particularly African Americans, they get called more often to be on jury panels, and they are actually on juries more and at a higher rate than non-people of color. So really, the folks who show up, and I want to just impart this to folks because I don't want this to come off as we're lecturing folks that you need to show up. Folks who show up, they have a duty, they take that duty seriously, and they really are, and some of my best jurors are people of color because they give a world perspective. And I think to answer your question, because I went way off, probably the funniest thing that someone told me to get off a jury was that that they didn't speak English well, and as they're walking out, they had a full-on conversation with someone. So that's probably the best thing I've seen.
I've seen that happen quite a few times. myself. So one of my next questions is, if there's a problem in getting people to serve on juries, why not just have cases tried by judges alone? Just have bench trials. Wouldn't that be more efficient? Mr. Brown.
No offense, Your Honor.
Mr. Brown was jumping at it already before I even said, Mr. Brown.
Only thing I trust less than a juror is a judge. Well, I'm in the church, I tell you. I think there's a value in people getting together and kind of hashing out the evidence in a single mind. I mean, that would take away the whole benefit of the diversity aspect of it if you just have a single person. And frankly, the bench isn't that diverse to be taking that risk, so you're just transferring the jury pool problem to the judges. So I still believe in jurors as much as you can. I've often wondered what they are thinking in those rooms, and sometimes when you talk to them afterwards, we tried the same case. Was he in the same room? Who cares what color shoes he was wearing? It's covered in blood or not. What are we dealing with? And so I still believe in the jury system. I think part of the things we can do, in particular with the Black community, is to take away some of the scary language around it. We talk about subpoenas. When I hear about a subpoena, I instantly get nervous, like who's in trouble? We need to change the way we talk about it. You're not in trouble, you're needed. Or a notice, maybe we should call them notices, but things that lower those barriers. I think when people talk to a server, friend of mine, I think it was yesterday, she's like, if I miss a day of work, that messes up my whole month. I don't think we can take that as just, there needs to be a policy change that would cause them not to miss money so that they can feel free to serve on those juries. And so I'm not in favor of judges making all of the decisions. Some of them, yes, but ultimately there needs to be a collection of voices that come together. And at least in Minnesota, and I know it varies, well, I think the Supreme Court might have cleared that up, but there has to be a unanimous verdict in Minnesota, and all 12 jurors have to agree. And there is that pressure sometimes, I think, if you're the one Black person on the jury. We've all been the one Black person in the room. And especially if the guy is guilty, now you got to, it's just a bad feeling altogether. But there is that pressure to say, are you going to be that voice? How are you going to stand up to this room of 11 other folks who don't look like you, who don't have the same experience? And how are you going to articulate that? And they got to have the courage to do it. But to Judge Harris's point, first you got to get them in. And then you got to empower them to bring their perspective to the room and not back down. And I'll be brief. A quick example, I had a case where, and I talked to the judges about it earlier, where a Black woman in Hennepin County was accused of stealing a car because the dealership said she lied in the paperwork. And we could have avoided this trial with a misdemeanor or something else, but she's like, no, I'm not a liar. I'm not a thief. I go to work every day. I bought this car. I had no reason to lie. So we went to trial. And there was a Black woman on the jury afterwards. After she was acquitted, she came and said, there was no way that was going to happen. I know there was no way. I don't care. We were here all night. She felt empowered. We not only need the faces there, we need to empower them to stand up and shut the whole thing down if it doesn't work for you. We need to tell them, you have the power to say, not today. And so consider it like voting. It's a vote. You know how sometimes in elections we say, I'm not sure my vote matters? Well, this is one space where your vote absolutely matters. It can be determinative of an outcome. So I think we need to get them there, empower them, and support them, and not transfer that to judges.
Thank you so much for that thought. It just reminds me, thank you, you could clap, it is important. It reminds me of one of the instructions that, the judge gives to the jury and tells them, if you have a strong opinion, when you go in to deliberate, maintain that strong opinion, but make sure you still talk with everybody. Because sometimes that group discussion, you may see another viewpoint. But if you still feel strongly about the evidence that you heard and your viewpoint, stand with your viewpoint. Yes, you do need a unanimous verdict, but you can now use that opportunity to express what your opinion is that maybe somebody else didn't think of, didn't see, and you're explaining it to them in that room. So use that opportunity, and I know the instructions in New York say something to that effect, that you can come in with that opinion, but make sure when you're in that room, you speak with everybody and you listen to other sides too. It may change your opinion, but it may not. So make sure you communicate in that jury room.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think that's a problem that the majority population, which is now the minority population in the country, so I guess we have to adjust our language there too. But I don't think that's a problem that the majority population has. I mean, I've had, you can go in with all 12 jurors and still come out with a hung verdict because somebody said, I don't care what you guys say, I'm not acquitting this person. I think they're guilty. We have to give that same level of empowerment to to people who don't speak English as their first language, to people who may have had criminal backgrounds and because now in Minnesota you can serve, you have a level of discomfort with group discussions. For people who just have smaller personalities, there's nothing wrong with that, but they're just not used to being the big voice in the room. And you know, as a trial lawyer, the first thing I see when the jury walk in is who's going to be before me, who's talking to who's already taken a leadership role. And so we have to empower people to make sure that they feel safe, that there's not going to be a penalty if they disagree with their colleagues on the panel.
Thank you so much. Ms. Yarni, I have a question for you. Do you think it's easier or harder to get jurors to serve on high-profile cases?
I think it can cut both ways because the jury that was picked for the Chauvin trial, I think was probably one of the more diverse juries that Minnesota's ever had. I think half the jury was people of color. And they sent out a questionnaire in advance. So the jurors filled out the questionnaire so the attorneys had a sense of who they were before they started doing the questioning. And so there were definitely people that wanted to be on that jury, and then there were people that definitely did not want to be on the jury. And I think potentially with a high-profile case, you're going to have more people that might be interested in wanting to serve, where with just an everyday average case, you usually get one or two jurors that seem super eager to be on the jury, and I'm always kind of wary of those jurors that really want to be on the jury. But normally it's kind of in the middle where they're willing to serve and they're willing to do it if they're able to do it. And I've noticed with jurors too that when they're done with jury deliberation and they come to whatever decision that they come to, that they really feel like it was a valuable experience. So like after jury service, they feel like they understand why it was important, they understand the duty of it, and they generally feel really not necessarily good about what the ultimate decision was, but good about their role in the process.
Thank you so much, Ms. Yanni. Senator Champion, how can we educate and encourage our citizens to willfully appear for jury duty?
You know, thank you again for that question. One of the ways that I think we can do it is having an intentional strategy to connect with our faith-based organizations and churches so that there's deliberate messages even throughout announcements. You know, the Black church has always been important when we think in terms of our advancement, and they're still important now. And so I think we have to go back to making sure that we do have these conversations where even in an announcement, there can be something that is said. And even educating pastors and leaders, because here's the thing. I know that we just saw Reverend Russell that was here, and even before, the current Reverend Russell was also Reverend Russell, his dad. And whenever pastors say something, it's next to God saying it. You know? It's like, for some reason, if your pastor says something, it's like, oh, right? So we should go back to making sure that we use our churches as a vehicle to make sure that we are having these intentional conversations, just the way we did around civil rights, just the way that we've done it in other places. So churches are important. Radio stations are also important. Black media is important. How do we make sure that we get these human interest stories out in a way so that people understand it, especially if you're not a lawyer? Because lawyers, we see it every single day. We only hear people talk anecdotally about, you know, white jurors and how they behave and how that impacts people who look like us. But I think that if we continue to talk to them just like Brother Brown said over there, or Attorney Brown said over there, is that when our people show up, they feel a sense of responsibility and duty. But I also think it's important for us to talk about how do we remove the barriers in order to make sure that our people not only feel empowered, and in order to get them to show up, for them to feel like I don't have to opt out because it's such a financial hardship for me that I cannot serve. So we want them to be able to do that. And so I think those are ways that we continue to get us engaged, intentional strategies in our community to talk about ways by which to make sure that they can become a part of the jury process, what it means to not just them as an individual, but our community, and also the person who's sitting there who is entitled to the presumption of innocence, how it's important for us to have those diverse voices at the table, because guess what? I've been in situations in trials where recently I had one in Dakota County where the young lady was charged with third-degree murder who never had any, not anything as a juvenile, but as an adult. They said that she and her brother were racing in a car, and she was in a separate car, and her brother's car hit another vehicle, and that person died, but they charged her with third-degree murder, even though she was in a totally separate car. But when we talked about that case, and that case was coming up, and the jurors all walked in, they were all white. And, well, let me take that back. The majority of them were white, and then when I tried to get another black person on the jury to keep them there, then that's when we can certainly get into the perimetry challenges and the Batson issues, because there was a Batson issue that was raised at that particular time. Because the prosecutor said, hey, I'm sure that they're going to be much more sympathetic to the young lady that's sitting right there. So there are all sorts of things that work in there. And let me just add my voice to the chorus of saying, judges, we do love you, but yet it's still a jury is much better than just having one viewpoint. We love you, though, let me just say. Okay, I love you and all. Judge Harris, I love you, man, but I can't let you do it, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. Judge Harris, what are the consequences for ignoring the subpoena and not showing up for jury duty?
Can you repeat that again for the?
So,
Yes, I'll repeat the question. What are some of the consequences for ignoring a subpoena to serve for jury duty?
well, like any order, a subpoena is an order of the court to appear. So the court can do an order to show cause, meaning they can go out, issue a warrant, bring a juror in to have them explain to the court why they did not show up. I'm going to tell you that is a consequence on paper in that it never happens, or it happens very rarely, because ultimately we are trying to resolve cases as well. So in essence, we have the ability to do that, but from a racial justice standpoint, it's not a good look to arrest people of color for not showing up for jury duty. So it's really important for us to, again, understand the importance of having our voice in the room and being there to actually be part of the process. Again, as Mr. Brown indicated, sometimes it's symbolic in that it gives a level of comfort, and sometimes it's not symbolic. Sometimes you are called on to be that voice of reason within that jury room to really slow down the system, really, and slow it down, because we are in a system that tends to sometimes value speed. We're going to all go in, we're going to have this trial, we're going to get a verdict and move on. Really, what good jurors do or conscious jurors do sometimes is just slow down and question and really slow the process down so that when you're making that decision, it's a fair and just decision. So short answer is that we have the ability to There are some consequences, but as judges, we are very wary to use those consequences, as we should be.
May I just add one more thing to that?
Yes, yes, you.
And as a consequence of, us needing to make sure that it's not a bad look for people of color to be arrested and those sort of things, because we don't always have people of color or black people a part of those jurors, when we go through voir dire or jury selection, I now have to ask critical questions about race. Because I gotta see if there's a predisposition that a juror might have about seeing a black person who may be the defendant. Do you now just believe that all people of color are just defendants? Are they entitled to the presumption of innocence? It forces us, at least me, to start finding some creative ways to ask some critical questions about their predisposition.
And to follow up on that, it's not just you not answering the subpoena, but as the senator said, someone may not feel like the jury represents them, because we're not answering the subpoenas, right? So we need to answer the subpoena so that a defendant in a criminal case can feel like my constitutional right to a speedy trial is there, but I also have a jury of my peers sitting there going to be the judge of the facts of my case. Remember, the judge is the judge of the law, but the jury is the judge of the facts. So you want a jury to represent the community at large, and so that defendant wants to feel confident that at least there's some people that look like me in the jury. So that's one of the other things that comes from not answering the subpoena. Ms. Yanni?
It's very important that a defendant has a jury of his peers and that people of color are part of the pool, but it's also so important for victims of color who are victims of crime, sexual assault, domestic violence, because there are cases sometimes where if there's a black victim up there, some all-white juries don't have that human connection with that victim, or they don't believe the victim because of other race-related issues. So the most important thing, of course, is the defendant and his constitutional rights, but it also plays on the other side, too, to have jurors that can relate to witnesses, that have experiences that they can bring to the deliberation room about victims. Because we do sometimes have situations where, with certain kinds of cases in Minnesota, it can be more challenging to get a conviction when you have a victim of color than if the victim is white.
I wanted to move to slide 8, because one of the things in slide 8 talks about if you don't have enough jurors, it may take a while to get a full jury panel to go through with the case. So you need people to serve, so that every time when I say I need a jury panel, we're ready, both sides are ready, I need enough people in that panel to come in so they can have enough people there to select a jury. I can't just have 12 people to get 12. I need 12, plus I need alternates. So I need a panel of about 40 people, right? Maybe even more. So you need to answer those subpoenas and let the process play out. I think somebody said that on the panel. Let the process play out. Don't just exclude yourself, but answer the subpoena and let the questioning take place and see if you get selected. It's important to serve. At this time, I sort of wanted to open up to questions that the audience may have, if there's any questions from people online, so we can answer some of the questions that may be out there. Are there any questions online or anyone in the audience who has a question? Yes.
I'm Judge Brenda Brown Green from the great state of Alabama.
Do you need a microphone just in case so that you can make sure the,
Can you hear me all right?
we just want to make sure the,
Okay.
just want to make sure those who are viewing virtually, live streaming can hear the questions as well.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes. Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, I would just like to say to the panel, I have enjoyed listening to you. It's been very, very informative. But I was just wondering, have you found it helpful to say to prospective jurors something along the lines of, what if you were on trial or a family member of yours on trial? Wouldn't you want someone like you to serve on the jury who can view the facts from your perspective and fully consider the law before making a decision? Because I have found that when I have had the opportunity to serve as duty judge in my court in Birmingham, Alabama, when I ask the parties that question, it seems as if their whole attitude changes because they haven't really thought about this could be them or this could be their family member. And so oftentimes I find that when we think about jury duty, most people think of criminal cases only and saying, oh, they're probably guilty or whatever, and we know that that is not the case always. But there are many civil cases. I mean, most of us drive vehicles, and we don't ask people to run into us or to cause damage to our vehicles and to our bodies or whatever. So have you found it helpful to say, what if you were in an automobile accident? Wouldn't you want to have someone on the jury who looks like you, who understands things from your perspective? So I'm just wondering if you all have found that to be helpful in trying to get individuals to think twice about service on the jury for both civil cases and criminal cases. Thank you.
So, Judge, I'll start by taking that. First and foremost, me and A.L. Brown, we are actually longtime friends, and he does invite people to run into him when he drives because he's terrible, the worst. But I do that, and one part of my introduction for every jury is to talk about the history of jury service, and I tell jurors that in the not too distant past, people like us could not serve on juries. And it wasn't just people of color, but women couldn't serve on juries. And I think when you remind folks of the fact that people, marched for this, people were arrested for this, people died and lost their lives for this, we cannot take this lightly, and we cannot treat it trivially. So I make that a central part of my discussion as I introduce the case to the jury. I go through everything that we have to go to, introduce the case, talk about being impartial, talking about all of that. But I always end with, before we get into asking you questions, let me tell you about how serious this is. And we let them know it's one of two things that you have direct representation in your government: voting and jury service. Those are the only two things that you as a citizen have a direct hand in an outcome. So I make that a central part, and then I make bias a central part of my discussion. And I talk about implicit bias. I talk about what that means. And I put that right front and center because we all do have these biases. And the problem is these biases, they're about our experiences, right? So I want and we want people on our jury who have experiences. And when you talk about it in the lens of implicit bias, when you talk about it in the lens of the history of jury service, it really brings it home for people. And I'll end by saying, when you leave, get out of here before he gets to his car. So.
I got good insurance, y'all. Y'all ain't got that right. I got good insurance, license, valid, everything.
Are there any other questions? Maybe.
Good evening. I'm Charmaine Russell. There were some comments online I was just going to read for you. One was from Dr. Hoax. She said it's important to encourage all eligible voters to register, and this would probably help us be well represented. So there's a comment/question from Minister Jay Craig, and I share the same experience with him. He says, so I'm 62 years old. If I have never been called to jury duty, even though I've never been in a system and I've had verifiable, stable housing, gainfully employed in non-legal system jobs, educated with a college degree, been active registered voter since he was 16, what would be the cost that he's never been called to jury duty? And I share the same experience. I'm 51, and I've never been summoned to jury duty.
Who would like to take that question?
You know, the skeptic in me says it's never unintentional. Like, we don't cast a big enough net to capture our communities, and we've got to fix systematically how that happens. Not all of the folks in our community are on welfare or get government assistance, but some of them are. And so we got to cast a net that says if you get a check from the government for welfare, they should also register you to both vote and to be on jury duty. We should comb the campuses and the black organizations on campuses to try to increase voter participation. Because I think in Minnesota, the primary way in which you get on the voter rolls, on the jury, in the jury pool, is to be in the voter rolls. And I think we have to expand that because we've been so disenfranchised with voter suppression and things like that that we've been discouraged to vote over the years. And so anytime somebody doesn't want me in a meeting, I generally want to be in that meeting. And so we have to encourage that attitude of why don't you want me to participate? There ought to be a way to talk to Senator Bobby Joe Champion, the first black president of the Minnesota Senate. There ought to be a way that you can opt into jury, that you can go into your county when you move into a different residence. Do you want to make sure that you opted into jury? They don't have to find you, that you can say, I'm 67, I'm at home, I work, I'm in my golden years, I'm ready to serve, I've got a perspective to offer. So I don't think that there is anything that, as a lawyer, I can do immediately. I think those are much more policy decisions that need to happen that lowers the barrier to service. To the senator's point, this is service, and we got to take away every barrier that's in the way for that type of service.
And if I might, I would say everything that Attorney Brown said is true. So we should do more automatic voter registration. That's one of the things that we talked about, even for 17 and 18-year-olds, right? As soon as they are able to drive, we should automatically register them to vote as well. I think another component is someone who gets state ID, have state IDs. They should also be able to become a part of that jury pool as well as a driver's license. And the optimum word that they often use is random, right? And so I get nervous whenever they say random, because random usually doesn't include us always, right? And so as a policymaker, that's one of the things that I am going to go back and take a look at. What is random? What are you using to determine what is random? And how is it that someone who is 60 plus years old, who's always been a registered voter, but for some odd reason, based on, the system that is currently in place, that they are never called in order to be a part of a jury pool. I would also say to the judge who is here visiting us from Alabama, you probably noticed my executive assistant to the president is sitting right there, and she's from Alabama. And so when the judge said Alabama, she started going, Alabama. So we want you to know that one of your folks got away. I want you to know. And she's here in the great state of Minnesota. And we want to continue to do all that we can from a policy perspective to say how can we make sure we remove every barrier possible so that we are more reflected and included in the jury process. And you're absolutely right, Member.
Can I add one point to that? I'll use the Chauvin trial as an example. Those who practice in Minnesota with any regularity saw the diversity of their jury pool and knew something was on. That someone had taken special effort to make sure that that did not look like a typical Hennepin County jury. Because the folks who are going to deal with the consequences of an all-white jury acquitting Mr. Chauvin knew that they had to take action. We need that same energy, as they say. Keep that same energy and that intentionality to ensure, because there was nothing typical about that Chauvin jury. It was the most diverse jury, and we didn't see the names, but we can hear the voices, and we know where they're from, and you're okay, and they're okay. They knew what they were doing, and they took the effort to make sure that was not an all-white jury. So there needs to be the lowering of barriers, but there also needs to be the intentional effort. Somebody's got to care. And since I have the judge's attention, Batson challenges ought to mean something. Some of the judges are part of the problem. For those who don't know, a Batson challenge is when someone says to the judge, it's not right that they're striking this person because they're a woman. It's not right that they're striking this person because they're black. This is a form of discrimination. There's a whole process you go through to try to figure out if that's the case. And I don't think the Supreme Court has held up a Batson challenge since they issued the decision. But judges at the district court can. And it's one of those decisions that I don't understand why judges don't get more active on, because you can't be appealed on. It's a freebie. It's a freebie. The judges, black, white, and indifferent, say, well, I don't want to call this prosecutor a racist. Well, let me. So.
Yes?
It's more of a comment, First Lady. My name is Ron Collier, and our First Lady indicated that she's never been called, and also Minister Craig indicated the same. I actually live in Dakota County now. I lived in Hennepin for a number of years, but since I've been in Dakota County, I've been called 3 times for jury duty.
I ain't
So I
seen you
don't-
again, I'm looking for you.
I didn't see it in my case. I sure didn't see it in my case. I was looking for you in my case.
There's a couple of questions on this side.
I'm Judge Herman Marable from Flint, Michigan, and with our conference, and we're just delighted to be here. I had a jury trial about 4 years ago, all-white jury. The litigants were white, the lawyers were white. Lawyers have to raise a Batson challenge too. I've not had lawyers raise a Batson challenge to me yet, believe it or not. And this is in 23 years on the bench.
Wow.
So lawyers have got to, do their part and not be a part of just the old boy system. And the senator in Michigan, we also use driver's license and state ID cards to compose our jury pool. So that's your next bill.
To the issue about lawyers participating, I'll tell you something that the public defenders kind of united did here in Minnesota. I think it was on the day of the anniversary of Gideon v. Wainwright, which is the case that gives you a right to an attorney. En masse, we all filed challenges to the jury pool. And it was designed to get the attention of the judiciary to say, we're tired of walking into jury rooms with black clients and Latino clients and Hmong clients and Somali clients and all white jurors. And I don't know, I know there's some activity going on with it on a level that's above my pay grade. I think they've kind of consolidated the cases. But we are paying attention to the, the fake reasons that some prosecutors give. And what they really don't understand is a lot of black folks are really conservative. And we live in the community, and we know when D-Ron did it. Come on, bro, that story don't match. The math not math, right? And so I think a lot of prosecutors do themselves harm in striking them, but we are, at least in Minnesota, actively working as a defense bar to try to push the issue of Batson. But we need judges to have courage enough to see a prosecutor that they're going to see again tomorrow and the next day and the next day to say, I don't think you're racist, but you're doing racist things.
I also think from the prosecutor's perspective that the culture in prosecutors' offices needs to change so that they're open to these kind of discussions without taking personal offense. Because I agree with Mr. Brown, jurors of color can be great. And a lot of times they'll kind of weed through distractions to really pay attention to the details of what happened in the case. So on both sides, there needs to be an effort to talk about race, to be comfortable with Batson challenges, and not take it personal, because it really doesn't happen very often at all. Batson challenges aren't being made the way that they should be.
And I know I made a Batson challenge like 3 months ago.
In Dakota County?
In Dakota County, too, on time of the Where were you, man? I'm still looking for you, Brother Collier. I'm still looking for you.
Before your question, I just wanted to add that in New York, where it's a melting pot, all types of people, Indian, black, white, Latino, Mexican, Asian, of all different cultures, Indian Asians, Chinese, Jamaican, Haitian. We look at all different things. So we look at driver's license, but we also look at the welfare rolls. You're getting a state check. So not only state ID, but you're getting a state check. So that's another way where you can get people who can be in the jury pool. So expand where you're looking at people. They're getting state IDs. Look at other areas where you can get a diverse pool of people to serve on the jury pool.
One of the things that we're also looking at here is, at least theoretically, that they say that if there are child care needs as well. So we need to expand that as well, because especially if we're looking to make sure that mothers are able to participate in real time, and fathers, because not only mothers are primary care providers, but also fathers are as well. So again, it goes back to my theme of making sure that we, even as a bar association, think about what we could do as lawyers when it comes to talking to our legislators about how do we remove the barriers that we see so that policy changes. Attorney Brown is right, because I try to make sure if different people I run into and talk to, if they have a policy idea, I run it all the way up to all the way up to flagpole, because it's important in order to make sure that when we think in terms of democracy, that democracy also starts not only with voting, but who shows up in that pool.
There is a question from out the audience.
Hello, my name is Julia Sabal.
Try it again.
My name is Julia Sabal, and my question is, what happens if you are the defendant and you believe that the juries are not jurors of your peers? What do you do, or what can you do about it? And it reminds me of the movie Reuben Hurricane Carter, when the juries, none of them look like him. And does that still happen?
Who would like to answer that question?
So there's two ways you can attack it, and we've been talking a little bit about one of them, the Batson challenge, where if you do have a juror of color and one of the attorneys, sometimes it's the prosecutor, says, I don't want that juror on my jury, you can then challenge that, saying that that was done out of racial animus, and then there's a whole process. There's a second process at the very beginning when that pool is developed and they walk into the jury. You can challenge the entire pool before you even get started and say, that's not a representative pool of my peers. Again, how the law is defined as it relates to representative pools makes it very difficult to succeed on that challenge, and we've created a hurdle where there's very specific information that defendant needs to have to really challenge that pool to at least get a judge to say, no, send that pool back, bring me a new pool of individuals. So those are the two things generally that you do. You challenge the whole pool, or you challenge each individual decision that an attorney is making in picking the jury.
But if you're sitting next to me and you're the defendant and it's all white juries, there's nothing I can do about it. I've got to focus on getting you to the next phase of the trial. And so a lot of the things that I'm talking about now are policy things, but when you're in trial, you have a completely different focus. I don't have time to worry about the entire there's a completely different set of responsibilities as an attorney. Once you know the reality of what that jury pool is, you gotta work with what you got. And you gotta do your best to persuade your client that you're gonna do your best to get them to the end. And that's not to say that an all-white jury has not acquitted some of my clients of color. They have. But you take on that extra burden, even if it's just a thought process, even if it's an imagined burden. You know, fake problems are still problems in your head, right? So even if it's an imagined burden, you have to shoulder that. But then it becomes my job as the attorney to give that client confidence.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? I don't want to leave any questions unanswered at this time. Any from the audience, any in the chat? Okay, thank you so much. At this time, I really want to thank all the panelists for coming this evening, sharing your thoughts. Let's give a hand to our panelists. Thank you so much to the virtual family for sending in your questions and participating. We appreciate you. And at this time, I would like to have the chair of our outreach committee come up and say a few words, Judge Sharon V. Burrell.
Thank you. Good evening. As Judge Daniels Peister mentioned, my name is Judge Sharon Burrell. I'm the chair of the National Bar Association Judicial Council Outreach Committee. I'd like to thank everyone who participated in this very important program. Special thanks to Greater Friendship Missionary Baptist Church for hosting the event. The panelists who are experienced attorneys and judges, members of the Judicial Council Outreach Committee, co-chaired by tonight's moderator, and most importantly, I want to thank the chair of the Judicial Council, who you heard from earlier, Judge Kimberly Esmond Adams, whose vision for this forum brings us here tonight. At our very first meeting of the Outreach Committee, Judge Adams discussed her vision of a jury forum, which the members of the committee wholeheartedly embraced. Judges from across the country spoke passionately about the importance of jury duty and the effect in our communities when juries are not diverse. This is our third forum. The first one was in Florida, the second one in Georgia, and now tonight's forum. After tonight's program, I hope that members of the community who joined us either virtually or in person will recognize how important it is to serve. Everyone has an obligation to serve. I've been a judge for almost 15 years on the Circuit Court for Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. Since I've been a judge, I've been called 3 times for jury duty, and I've served 3 times. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court lives in my jurisdiction, and when he was called for jury duty, he came. He came with federal marshals, but he came. So the next time you receive a jury summons, don't get upset. Don't try to think of a reason why you can't come, and don't blow up the clerk's phone. Instead, step up and sit down. Thank you again for being with us tonight.
We're done. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. Have a great evening, and I look forward to hearing that you served on a jury at some point. Thank you.